When I was in business school, I lived in a northern Chicago suburb called Evanston. It's an affluent town located along Lake Michigan and is 30 minutes from downtown Chicago. It's not known for its restaurant scene, but the joke among my classmates was the bubble tea shops that kept popping up. It wasn't an ad hoc observation.
The U.S. bubble tea market is growing at nearly 10% each year through 2030.
Bubble tea is unique because of the bubbles that sit at the bottom of the drink. These bubbles are made from tapioca starch, which comes from cassava, a crop that might just save the world. This is Chika Dunga.
And I'm Chisom Enelama. Welcome to Plates Without Borders by African Food Changemakers.
When you think of starches, what comes to your mind? Crunchy McDonald's French fries? Creamy penne vodka from your local Italian restaurant? Or a classic cornbread served during Thanksgiving? Potatoes, wheat, and corn form the carb trinity in the United States.
However, in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, cassava has a fan base of its own.
And now, cassava is making a move in the West because of two major trends: rising gluten sensitivity and climate change. These trends present an opportunity for cassava-producing countries.
For example, Nigeria, located in West Africa, is the world's largest cassava producer. The country single-handedly produces 20% of the world's cassava.
But surprisingly, it only exports $1 million worth of cassava, which means there's a ton of room for growth.
Then I was still very young, about 25 years ago. I was working for a company called Agro, and at that time was when President Obasanjo was the president, and he was pushing for cassava to be used as an industrial crop.
Meet Yemesi Iranloye, a pioneer who's revolutionizing Nigeria's cassava processing landscape.
My name is Yemesi Iranloye. They call me the Cassava Queen. I am the founder CEO of Sultry International Company Limited. We are located in the rural village of Alaide, Hawaii, Oyo State in Nigeria. Sultry International is into the production of cassava-based processing of food-grade starch, which is used in the manufacturing of beverages, as binders, in the making of seasoning and different manufacturing products. We're also into the production of high-quality cassava flour, also are using binders and also in the making of the noodles and all of that. Then we also produce glucose, maltose, and we are the first to use cassava to produce sorbitol, which is used in the oral care industry and also in the food industry and in the pharma industry.
Yemesi has the vision to turn Sultry International into a cassava processing powerhouse and help Nigeria tap into the growing global demand for cassava-based products. Her ambition is a big deal because it shifts the paradigm of Africa exporting raw materials to exporting value-added goods. In economics, the act of processing a raw material is called value addition. Essentially, something is being done to a raw material to make it more valuable. For example, cacao is processed into a paste that's used to make chocolate that we enjoy. Processed goods command higher prices in global markets. Let's hear more about Sultry's origin story.
While I was in Agro, I had got my own vision to do my own processing in the way that I'm doing it right now. And on that fateful day, there was this old man who brought his goods, and his goods were all bad, and it was rejected at the Way Bridge. I went to meet the man, and he said, that he borrowed that money from a microfinance bank, and he will not be able to pay back. And it's been rejected because the crops are bad, because he spends 5 to 6 days on the road because the road was bad. I felt the business had no reason being where it was. And I prayed that if I have mine, I will want to show the world that we need to take agro-processing right into the bush, into the forest where the farmers are, instead of siting them in the town, and farmers have to be the ones to suffer to bring the product to them.
I want to learn what's so interesting about cassava. Well, it's a good thing we have a chef who put cassava on the menu of his New York City restaurant.
Well, cassava is a starchy, very neutral. It's neutral flavor, and which is its great property, really, because that neutral aspect allows cassava to be also very versatile. And you can introduce cassava in so many different type of cuisines.
This is Chef Pierre Thiam.
I'm a chef, restaurateur, and food entrepreneur at large. I have a CPG company called Yolele, and I have 2 restaurants called Teranga in New York City. I'm also a cookbook author. I've written 4 cookbooks on the topics of West African cuisine, which is where I'm from. I'm from Senegal.
Chef Pierre introduces us to the multifaceted nature of cassava, including the many diverse ways this root vegetable can be incorporated into various dishes.
And it's the African potato, they call it, but it's really much more. There's so many applications because of, again, that neutral flavor makes it versatile. For instance, you talked about acheke. It's fermented cassava couscous. So the cassava is like grated, soaked for fermentation and allowed to turn into granulation. It hits you a bit with umami. And you have gari, is another type of cassava, a way of consuming it. It's a flour that in Nigeria, they turn it into eba, for instance. And you go to Brazil, they call it farofa. It's similar to the fermented cassava flavor.
All right, so I'm Nigerian. I know what gari is, and I've eaten Brazilian food before, so I'm familiar with farofa. But let's be honest, these aren't exactly American staples.
That's definitely true, but there's Siete Foods, the consumer packaged goods company that Pepsi purchased for $1.2 billion at the beginning of 2025. They use cassava in their tortillas and egg rolls. They even have cassava pepperoni pizzas. It seems cassava is slowly infiltrating the everyday American diet, and for good reason. According to NYU Langon's Health Hub, approximately 1/3 of Americans eat gluten-free products. The consumer market for gluten-free products is growing at 11% through the year 2030.
Wow. Pepsi bought a company that uses cassava for $1.2 billion? That's amazing. So let's talk business. What makes cassava stand out in the gluten-free market?
That's a great question, and I've got an answer for you. Cassava is arguably the best gluten-free product on the market that can replace popular starches. We got to speak to Toyin Kolawale, the founder and CEO of Iya Foods, a consumer packaged goods company that uses cassava. She explained that cassava flour excels in 3 key areas: its neutral, adaptable taste, its texture, which somewhat mimics gluten, perfect for foods like pizza and bread, and its affordability compared to other gluten-free options.
Thanks for that info, Chisum. It's a no-brainer why the tropical crop is making inroads into the West. Yet, there's a strange irony in this story. Many people shifting to cassava to meet their dietary needs means there's money on the table for cassava-producing countries. But oddly enough, the top producers don't have a seat at the table. That's weird.
Cassava is projected to grow to an $8 billion market by 2030. Where should the bulk of that processed cassava come from? Nigeria, DRC, Ghana. At least 5 African countries are within the top 10 producing cassava countries in the world. Yet collectively, our total export conservatively is less than $2 million USD.
Here's Dr. Tony Bello. Dr. Bello has a PhD in food science from the University of Texas A&M. He's worked for some of the biggest global brands in the consumer packaged goods industry, like Frito-Lay. He's now the founder of Shinebridge Global. Let's hear more about it from him.
I'm a proud starch chemist who understands product development from ideation to commercialization. Now I'm an entrepreneur looking at how to transform African food staples beyond the staple foods, beyond the domestic, into the food service as well as industrial usage across the globe and doing it at scale.
Dr. Bello's mission is a big, with a capital B, deal. One thing that stood out in our conversation was the use of this phrase. He said it multiple times.
Industrial food ingredients.
This phrase is the moneymaker that can transform the economic landscape of cassava-producing African countries.
In the 70s, a major consumer goods manufacturer decided to get into the snack food business. They were a paper industry, for crying out loud, but they utilized the engineering principles of cellulose chemistry to make potato chips that is placed in a tennis can container as a convenient form of transporting these products all the way from the United States or across the globe.
Potato chips placed in a tennis can container. You might just know the brand he's talking about. Let's keep listening.
That product is made from dehydrated potatoes. So dried potatoes is a good example of an industrial food ingredient. And this consumer food company decided, let us take this to scale as an industrial food ingredient and turned it into a stackable potato chips. That brand sold for $3-4 billion. And so imagine that we do that for cassava and turn it into a $4 billion type of market. I was talking about one brand. This is where for us, Africa must rise through food science and technology applications. We've done it in the West. Why can't we do it in Nigeria and other cassava high producing countries?
Dr. Bello's mission to globally scale African food staples isn't easy. But if it can be done, it would mean economic growth for African countries and a sustainable solution to growing global demand. However, before we even get to the science and technology that creates innovation, countries must ensure that the cassava harvested makes it in one piece to the lab. One major issue is cassava's shelf life, one that's notoriously short. But solutions are already underway.
I've traveled quite a bit looking for how do we extend the shelf life of cassava. And my final answer is cold storage. That is how we store potatoes all in the Western world. Potatoes is harvested in certain regions for 3 or 4 months of the year. How do we think we bring baking potatoes and fresh potatoes to the grocery stores? It is through cold storage.
And the second is closing the distance between farms and food processing facilities.
The African Development Bank is really promoting that concept in what they refer to as special agro-processing zones. And the whole concept really is about locating your food processing factories in rural areas close to areas of production.
This is what Yemesi's company, Sultry International, is doing.
The next problem to solve is increasing Africa's supply of cassava.
The challenge we have, even though we are one of the biggest producers, is that we eat it. They don't eat it in Thailand. And that's a challenge because we eat a lot of it. And we're a lot. Nigeria, we're large. So we produce about how many millions tons of cassava? We also eat it in millions of tons.
Finally, there's financing. According to Yemesi, capital is expensive for entrepreneurs that want to process cassava in Nigeria.
The cost of finance is too high, and that's making it difficult for us to compete at the international space because we are competing with guys that are getting their funding at single digits, 5, 9, 8, 7. In fact, China is getting less than 2, maybe. Something like that, very low, because their countries, they are supporting export. When they come to establish, they move the products more or less to support their own economies. They are being supported back home, where we are doing about 30 to 35% trail. And how do we compete?
Once African countries solve these hurdles, cassava has a chance to make it on the shelves of Western retailers. The next step is convincing the hearts and minds of millions with storytelling genius.
To open a market, you have to brand and tell the story and talk about its properties and really let the consumer knows what advantages he would have in introducing cassava into its diet. The packaging has to tell the story. It has to be visual and attractive and educative.
As we continue to embark on our exploration of cassava, we turn to one of the most pressing issues of this age. That's right, we're back to the conundrum that is climate change. It's difficult to avoid the topic, especially when we see the impact on our food security. Many crops just can't keep up with these new, harsher conditions. Yet, once again, cassava provides a solution.
There's an interest in cassava in a sense that that's an ingredient that is offering solutions to many of our challenges. Not only is it a drought-resistant crop, but it's also very resistant to pests. Any crops that are drought-resistant and are resilient, which is what cassava is, resilient, are the crops of the future. Water is precious. We have depleted a lot of our water supply, especially in the West, especially here in the US. So now we need to rethink our agriculture, and we have to rethink it with crops that are drought resistant, like cassava, like fonio, like millet, like so many others. But unfortunately, those haven't been introduced into the food system yet in a wider way. So that's the way forward. We have to figure out a way to introduce them. And for us, the advantage of cassava being versatile, there's so many ways you can apply it into this food system.
As I've worked on this story, one theme that comes to mind is the power of imagination. Yemesi, Chef Pierre, and Dr. Bello aren't satisfied with the status quo. They see a future where cassava takes center stage and Africa is the main character. It's a vision that sees Africa not as a receiver, but a giver to the world. Quite different from the typical narrative we're familiar with in the West.
I can never forget, I think it was 2007, 2008. I went to Nigeria for the first time after a long hiatus. And I saw a billboard that said cassava is the next gold. I was so excited seeing that billboard.
The economic transformation is enormous. The farmers, the manufacturers, the brands.
When you transform cassava into household food like starch, flour, sorbitol, glucose, you are using millions of farmers to farm for you. And those farmers, the transformation at the rural space where the factories and the farms are is tremendous. If you come to the village that gave us land right now, the place now have power, they have water, they have road. The government was forced to do a road network up to the village. Why? Because we were there. They were less than $1 a day. Now they're around $10 a day.
In an increasingly complex world with global shocks caused by war, climate crises, and COVID-19, the call for Africa to rise to attention is loud and clear.
You know, we're all crying about Ukraine and the grains coming from Ukraine. Let's turn that story around, that Africa cassava saved the world from hunger. The market is too big for any one individual to say, I'll do it alone. We're talking $8 billion market. Right now, the whole of Africa is less than 2 million. So let's find ways to work together, partner together, collaborate. If we work together now with our science, with our MBAs, with our political and public service holders who are not corrupt, let's work together to be sure that we bring cassava to the global market in a sustainable manner. I know we can do it, and we are doing it.
I want the US market to know that Nigeria cassava is going to be coming in, and it's going to come in good quality, good quantity, for the best type of recipe you can ever imagine. So watch out.
Like an all-star athlete, cassava has all the right attributes to become a powerhouse in the West. It's an answer for rising gluten sensitivity and climate change. Before this podcast story, I used to think of wheat as a dominant starch. But now I'm looking forward to trying new ways to eat cassava. What about you, Chisum?
I'm inspired, Chika. Cassava's potential to transform the food industry while promoting African economic growth and sustainability is a game changer. Imagine the lives it could change, from the farmers who harvest the crops, to manufacturers who process it, and entrepreneurs who come up with innovative ways to use cassava. This could revitalize economies by creating many jobs. It's a crop that embodies the continent's resilience and innovation. I'm excited to see its impact.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Plates Without Borders podcast. Do us a favor and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform. This episode was produced, written, and edited by myself, Chika Dunga, and Chisum Anelama. Music selection and sound design also by myself, Chika Dunga. Mixing and mastering by Casey Ellis. We especially thank our guests, Chef Pierre Thiam of Yolele Foods, Dr. Tony Bello of Shinebridge Global, and Yemesi Iranloye, founder and CEO of Sultry International. This episode was sponsored by Afrexim, also known as the African Export and Import Bank. The Plates Without Borders podcast is a product of African Food Changemakers, a vibrant community of entrepreneurs transforming Africa's agri-food landscape. To learn more about this podcast and to learn more about African Food Changemakers, visit our website at www.afchub.org. Thanks for listening. See you next time. This is Plates Without Borders by African Food Changemakers.